let's get going. This week, the name on the marquee has got to be Yaroslav Amosov, who this past weekend at Bellator 291, Amosov versus Storley 2, defeated, once again, Logan Storley, this time by unanimous decision. Shutout on the scorecards, 50-45, all three judges. Mark, let me send it over to you first. Give us your reactions of Amosov getting it done once again by unanimous decision, staying undefeated.
What a friggin' return for Yaroslav Amosov to be out as long as he was. We touched on it last week. If you watched the Bellator broadcast, they did a great little segment on it, but this man was in the Ukraine, defending his country, actively fighting in the war, comes back now, fresh off of that, dives back into training, and to look that good is wild. But yeah, in case you forgot, he returned to remind everyone that he is one of the best welterweights on the planet. And this thing was a mismatch for every single second that it lasted. Like, Storley was pieced up 2 minutes into that fight. Amosov's footwork was so good, in and out, quick counters. He did an incredible job of stringing combos together. Like, in moments where guys would normally kind of reset after an exchange, he would extend that exchange by 2 or 3 more shots, and that's when he was really landing and hurting Logan. He was stuffing takedowns all fight. He was making Logan pay anytime that he stepped in. I mean, Storley couldn't even figure out how to attempt to fight his fight. He just was getting stuck at every turn. And not to mention, Amosov was ripping the shit out of Storley's legs all fight long. They were torn up by the end. I mean, Logan Storley absorbed a beating by the time that fight was over, and Amosov fought a perfect fight. So, I mean, yeah, okay, Logan Storley is probably not an elite level welterweight. I'm not sure exactly where he'd stack up, say, if he was in the UFC. But he is solid, and I think it's time to start wondering where Yaroslav Amosov stacks up, because the man is 29-0, and he just put on a masterclass.
He sure did. Omar, let's bring you in here. Give us your reaction of Amosov getting it done once again, staying undefeated now, 27-0 over Logan Storley.
Oh, it's 27? I said 29, my fault.
You might be right.
It was a perfect performance. I think the one thing that Logan Storley had going for him, and I mean probably the one thing he had going for him in that fight, was a check right hook from the southpaw stance. That, I think, was the only thing that ever even really touched Amosov the entire fight and kept him somewhat at bay from not barraging and blitzing him continuously. But there was a lot of that. There were a lot of clean shots that landed that were followed up by forward pressure and forward shots. It was interesting to watch the fight because the first 2 rounds I was watching this fight and I was like, isn't Storley a wrestler? Doesn't he go for takedowns? And I was like, what the fuck is happening? Why are you like just standing with this guy? And he didn't go for nearly as many takedowns. And I think the 3rd round is when he turned it up from a takedown perspective and still couldn't do anything about it. And so it makes you wonder, when a guy like Storley can't get a takedown in a fight like he couldn't in this one, what does he do? And I think that's where his discomfort really came from in a majority of that fight, was because he didn't really have any answers to what he brought to the table other than takedowns. And when those didn't work, nothing else did.
Yeah, I think it was maybe Big John that pointed it out. Maybe not. Maybe it was the other dude. I forget who was Big John's partner that night. But he said that he felt like Storley, and we mentioned this about the cardio being a potential thing. Obviously, it was not. Sure. Amosov was totally fine. But he mentioned thinking that Storley maybe didn't hit the gas takedown-wise in the first couple rounds, thinking like, this is going to come. I just got to kind of let him work a little bit, and then I'll take over. And then by the time he realized Amosov wasn't going away, it was just he was already fucked. So maybe that played into it. But, yeah, he's had fights where he doesn't like go for the takedown so much before. Like, he fought Neiman Gracie, and obviously he didn't want to play a ton on the ground with him. And he was able to land on kind of like he was able to lean on kind of like a brawling style that he can fight. Like I said last week, he's not any kind of clean striker, but he can kind of brawl in there. But Amosov didn't even allow it. Amosov was so clean and so in and out that there wasn't even an opportunity for Storley to make it ugly. So he just, both options he had didn't exist, and he just had to kind of stand there and be a punching bag.
Mark, question for you, because your personal rankings system is exclusively, as of now, UFC. So Amosov now is 27-0 as a professional. If you were to just pluck him and plop him down into your UFC ranking, where would he be?
That's a question.
It's a fun one.
He'd be at least
Throw it out there.
7. If I'm putting the champ as 1 instead of champ, if I'm just like making the top 10 welterweights, there'd be 6 guys that I'd have to put over him: Leon Usman, Colby Chimaev, Bilal, and Burns, just because of their resumes. Not saying I think they'd all 100% beat him, but I'm just saying if I'm ranking guys, I think their resumes are too strong. I think he's probably in the mix of like Neal and Luque and Masvidal and Wonder Boy. He's right. He's in there somewhere, right in that area.
Totally. What about you, Amar? Any intuition you have about that?
I mean, I would probably put him maybe above Wonder Boy, but below Burns. Probably right in that area.
Yeah, it's tough because it's the typical Bellator problem. It's like, okay, he beat Logan Storley twice.
Yeah.
He beat Douglas Lima.
Yeah.
What else? He did beat Roberto Soldic by split decision back, I think that was like 5 years ago. But besides that, it's not like there's a ton on that resume, so it's very hard to call it. But
Totally.
Yeah.
he's another
It's
one of these
subjective,
guys
for sure.
you'd love to see him fight a couple more names that we're familiar with, you know?
Hell yeah.
I think the performances, though, also speak to a certain extent. I mean, the way he fought that fight and how consistently he fought that fight for 5 rounds and made it worse and worse. You know, he really keep doing this. Dragged? Dragged? I don't know. He took Storley into deep waters that night.
Oh, I see.
Took him there.
I think dragged.
It's dragged, right?
I don't think it's
When I
drugged.
say drug, I'm like, doesn't sound right.
No.
And the fact that he's undefeated. Anyone with an O in their record always feels a little more like maybe he's great.
special.
Because you haven't seen anyone, do it.
Yeah. A lot of times, though, they could be fluffed up and, kind of guys that can't wrestle at all, and maybe he's got a very basic wrestling game. Like, we've seen some of that going on, too. But to be fair, Amosov, I think, is one of those guys that has, like I said, the performances to stand behind the record that he has. I think it shows value.
I've heard people say before that the early half of his record is very empty. But even so, I feel like he has reached a point now where he's kind of overcome that knock.
Yeah,
He has 27 fights.
27 fights without losing.
Yeah.
That's quite a bit. What's next for Storley? Mark, you have any sense of what Storley has in his future?
So I think it's pretty expected that it's going to be Jason Jackson at this point, who has looked really good in his Bellator run. I want to say he's 5 or 6-0, 6-0, I think. But his last 3 he beat Neiman Gracie, he beat Paul Daly, he beat Douglas Lima, and he's doing it without much issue. So it's an interesting challenge. Of course, Amosov will be the favorite, but it is at least a worthwhile fight that he's got coming up because Jason Jackson has looked very good. And I know he intentionally didn't take another fight because it didn't really seem like it made sense for him to fight anyone else because he was kind of right there. So I think he was just kind of waiting for the winner of this one, and now we'll see.
Yeah, man, Jackson's good. He's
Yeah,
really
he
good.
is.